Hey guys! It's Gwen,
Mia,
Abby,
and Cody.
and on this week of Dragons, we're going to be talking about how to train your dragon and specifically looking through the lens of disability studies.
So if you aren't familiar with what disability studies is, it's the study of disability in the context of social, cultural, and political environments as opposed to like medical context. So instead of seeing it as a problem needed to be fixed, disability studies does more analyzing of the world around us and kind of the social impacts placed on disability. So in this episode, we're going to be applying what we know and have learned in disability studies to Pixar's How to Train Your Dragon.
So in the beginning of the movie, we see that Hiccup is actually the one that creates Toothless's impairment. He shoots him out of the sky, and then Toothless loses one of his tail fins. And the movie just kind of explores their development of their relationship and kind of how they cross into each other's spaces and navigate that in a world that doesn't necessarily accept their relationship yet.
So, the primary characters in the movie in which we see disability represented are, of course, Hiccup and Toothless, as Hiccup does lose his leg near the end of the movie, and as Mia just mentioned, Toothless was disabled by Hiccup. But even though these are the two kind of main or primary characters in which we see disability represented, there are also several other characters who are potentially disabled in the movie.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think within Hiccup's friend group, specifically with the twins, I think that there were some notes of potential intellectual disability there. That was something that was definitely present.
Yeah, I definitely agree too that there are other characters, and one of the ones that really stuck out to me was Fish Legs, and it's not explicitly stated that there's any disability there really or an impairment, but there were some neurodivergent tendencies, just kind of like with info dumping and just kind of stating a lot of facts and not really picking up on some of the social cues. So that's kind of another aspect of disability represented in the movie.
And of course, there's another major character who's also physically disabled, which is Gobber, who is, of course, missing both an arm and a leg.
So I thought it was interesting. My stance on Hiccup is I believe that he was disabled before he even lost his leg at the end of the movie. I think, honestly, emotionally and physically, he is obviously a little weak. He is not as big as everyone else in Berk, but also he is more emotionally sensitive, and I think he has a lot to him that sets him apart from the community. Having impairments that we would see as disabilities in our world are actually what makes them strong and mighty in theirs. Would you guys agree?
Totally, I agree. Because I feel like as you maybe lose limbs in battle or you accumulate these scars over time, you kind of gain the respect of your tribe, your Viking tribe. I think Abby touched on this a little bit, but we see this in Gobber. Like he lost a leg and an arm, and he is seen as this strong fighter. He's wrangling the dragons in the opening scene, and everyone has a lot of respect for him there.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what Mia said, because I feel like in a lot of different parts of the movie, they kind of make a point of like, it is a really big milestone to kill your first dragon, and that you are part of the community once you do that. And I feel like in Berk, these battle scars are viewed as a badge of honor and a point of inclusion.
I think it's really interesting in general just how disability is viewed and normalized in Berk. Losing a limb or having some kind of physical impairment in Berk is really considered very normal, and even something that they take pride in. As Mia mentioned a minute ago, when Gobber is telling the story of how he lost his arm and his leg, the people around him who he's talking to see that as a point of pride for him, as something for him to be proud of and to tell this story proudly and to wear his prosthetics with pride.
Right, no, I agree. And also going back to kind of Cody was talking about how Hiccup was socially disabled just by how he was viewed in his environment. I think that this is really confirmed in his conversation with his father when he's in his like dragon killing training, and his dad comes back from his time on the ship, and everyone is cheering. They're so excited to say, like, your son is amazing. He's a prodigy. He's just like you. And so his dad comes home and is like, I'm so proud of you. We finally have something to talk about. And I think that this is a really monumental shift, because by this time, Hiccup had been developing that relationship with Toothless, and he's finally granted this access into his culture because he's finally able to be in this dragon killing community. But he's now conflicted because he doesn't want to kill dragons anymore, which is kind of the thing that is socially disabling him.
Yes, I love, Mia, how you're talking about how this dragon killing rituals is a very cultural thing and a very big part of their culture. I thought it was interesting how losing a limb at the end of the movie was almost how Hiccup was able to kind of join or become one of the Vikings. It was almost as if him losing a leg and having that physical impairment was kind of a physical representation of him becoming one of the Vikings. As in their culture, disabilities aren't seen as inherently positive or negative or as some kind of like weakness or tragedy, but just as a part of life and a part of their culture.
And I think that gets me thinking, because Hiccup's dad doesn't have any impairments that he's received from battle. And I think that the reason why these impairments, specifically limb loss, are seen as kind of a sign of respect is because of experience in battle. So not only did Hiccup lose his leg, but he lost his leg in battle with the queen dragon. And so then I think that on top of his impairment, which is a physical indication, he is known to have kind of all of that battle experience as well.
And I also think it's interesting to consider, would his loss of his lower leg, would this disability be considered with pride if he hadn't lost it in battle?
Oh, that's such a good question. I don't know.
That's
right.
That question.
I think that kind of goes back to what we were talking about and what Cody mentioned, that it almost seemed like he was socially disabled from the get-go. Like, whether it's his empathy or that he physically stood out from everybody else, that I really do, in my opinion, think that this wouldn't have been like a point of inclusion had it been lost, had his leg been lost in any other event.
I agree.
Yeah, I think that's a good summary, Glenn. I like that. So let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about prosthetics in the movie. I personally think they had some really good representations of prosthetics in the movie. They were visible and acknowledged, but they were also very functional and very accepted and normalized. Of course, with Gobber's his loss of his hand, he of course lost dexterity and isn't able to do some of the things that a typical hand could do since he lost it. But he also, in a way, gains a unique strength with his prosthetics, like with his hand that's like a club, or with his hand that's like he uses to weld and things like that.
Or like the hand that he has that's a hook, where he's like hooking that dragon and
Right.
whipping it
Yes.
around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think it's interesting when we think about prosthetics and kind of compare it to our world, and that prosthetics in our world are really focusing on giving people the ability to do things that they might have lost. Like, if basically like what Abby said with Gobber, like if someone had lost their hand, a lot of doctors, medical professionals will really want to give them a prosthetic that can give them that dexterity and the ability to use fingers and do like a lot of the fine motor skills and everything. But in this world, what they really need are kind of tools and things that could help them in their individual purpose in the community or in killing dragons.
Yeah, I think to compare it to our world that we exist in, we live in a very at least in the United States, individualistic community. So everyone is trying to do things on their own, and we really, really push for independence. And I don't think that's necessarily the case for the Vikings in the movie. And that's why these varying prosthetic devices that we see being used are so successful. So Gobber, maybe he loses dexterity with his impairment, with his upper arm impairment, and he doesn't have his hand, but he doesn't necessarily need that to complete his tool making job successfully. And so I think that even as somebody is losing a limb or is having some kind of impairment over time, they're still able to contribute to the community and have a place, have a meaningful impact. And if they are needing help, they seem to be very community oriented and more interdependent as a community as a whole.
So going back to prosthetics, I've been thinking about the younger viewers who would be watching this movie, as Pixar is typically marketed or for younger viewers. And I'm thinking of the ones who may be limb impaired and who may have prosthetics or may be in need of them. I feel like the way that it's represented in How to Train Your Dragon, where they lose a limb, but with their new prosthetic, they're kind of gaining a new tool, or their prosthetic kind of helps them, helps guide them through life. I feel like that is a good message, that if you are a young viewer who has a prosthetic limb, there's no one way to go about living, and I feel like that just shows them that they can do anything with their prosthetic, and
it gives them like a positive relationship with their bodies.
Because as the characters in the movie, they all have their own respective roles, and their impairments and their prosthetics, their prosthetic limbs don't stop them from doing that. I feel like watching that as a young impaired viewer would be very inspiring.
And I also think it could be really positive for even younger viewers who aren't disabled, just to see that representation of prosthetics in a movie that's so normalized and just treated as a part of everyday life, and nothing that's nothing to be pointed at or laughed at, or even to be viewed as like something that's
I love that
out of the
point.
ordinary.
I love that point.
So now I kind of want to present the question. It's a loaded question, because what even is good representation? But I feel like they didn't dwell on any disability in the movie, but specifically Hiccup losing his leg. I feel like it wasn't a focal point of the movie, it was just something that happened. And I wonder if viewers think that this is good disability, because you want it to be talked about, and it is. I think it is represented in the movie, but also, was it enough? So that's my question.
So your question is the disability representation in the movie, is it a good balance, or did they not focus on it enough?
Yes.
It's a hard question. I think
really hard one.
Like talking about it as
And I don't know if
individuals
there's
who
an
haven't-
answer, but it's interesting to talk about.
I think it's to each their own, kind of how each person perceives it.
Yeah, it's like very, I think, up to your own perceptions. Like obviously I have not experienced like limb impairments that are socially disabling, but I really liked how disability, I think like Abby said, is kind of normalized, and maybe the use of adaptive devices is normalized as well. I really liked the representation.
I definitely agree with Mia. I think kind of like this perspective, I know whenever it first came out, and what year was it, 2010?
Yeah,
And we
maybe.
were, kindergarten, first grade, something like that. Whenever I watched that movie, that was not the thing that I thought of. It wasn't, like what Cody said, it was not made a focal point, and it was just part of the it was part of the movie, it was just part of the community. And I think that's a really good representation, especially for the audience. Like a lot of younger viewers are watching it, and it's kind of like what Abby said too, that it's not seen as something that either like someone just points at or laughs at or just like no one talks about. It's just part of the community, and it's just something that a lot of people have experienced.
Yeah, and I think that sometimes it can be kind of a like tough topic to traverse, because I think that in other movies you see superheroes and you see how people are maybe experiencing disability and or impairment as a temporary quote unquote
Right.
issue that is like fixed as they gain whatever superpower. And I feel like this movie doesn't really have that, which makes it positive.
Right. I would definitely agree with that too. I feel like disability, as represented in the media and in a lot of different stories, it's kind of seen as the sole aspect of a character's identity.
Like the thing that you have to overcome.
Right. That you have to overcome, that you have to fix it, that you have to find a cure or something. And it's made to seem like a very, very, very large aspect of a lot of different stories. Like, the impairment is the person, but here it's just another detail of the story, and it's not the sole
Yes.
part of the plot.
Like, it's not like a giant personality trait.
Right.
It's not a like it is life altering, but it's not the sole focus of any one character, which I think is a very important distinction to make.
Mm-hmm.
In asking my question, I've seen a lot of people discuss, which will bring us to our next point, the interdependence between Toothless and Hiccup, because Toothless needs Hiccup to fly, and I feel like that's been a little bit of a controversial aspect of the movie, whether people think that that is a good representation of a non-disabled person being completely necessary for an impaired person to exist and to act, and for a dragon in this instance to literally fly. He can't fly without someone who's not impaired. So we can discuss the interdependence now, whether we think it's positive or negative, if you all want.
Oh, yeah, this is a really complicated question too, because it depends on where you're looking in the movie. So I think I kind of want to fast forward to after Hiccup becomes impaired. When Hiccup is impaired and Toothless is impaired, their interdependence grants them access into each other's respective areas. So at the end of the movie, we see that the dragons are living and able to use the resources that the Vikings are able to gather, and in turn, the Vikings are granted access into maybe greater territories because they are able to ride the dragons, giving them flight as transport. But I think that's very different than if we're looking at Toothless before he lost his leg in that accident, especially because he created the impairment for, did I say Toothless? I think
Hiccup created the impairment for
Hiccup
Toothless.
created the impairment
Yes.
for
It's-
Toothless.
I definitely agree, Mia. It's almost a different dynamic between when Hiccup is not physically disabled and Toothless is, and then at the end when they're both physically disabled. I think that the dynamic of their interdependence is notably different between those two situations.
I also found it really interesting, and I kind of forgot to mention it earlier, that Hiccup is the person who caused Toothless impairment in the first place, but now he is also kind of Toothless's crutch. Toothless
Yeah,
crutch.
yeah.
Like, Toothless cannot function without Hiccup, but Hiccup is the one who made Toothless impaired in the first place, so I thought that would be interesting to discuss.
I think it is interesting, but I feel like we shouldn't look at Hiccup in like a savior, quote unquote, context, because Hiccup's intent was to kill the dragon. It wasn't his intent to impair Toothless so he could ride him. He kind of learned that about himself along the way and kind of, I think, had to live with that mistake. I think if we want to get into even more nuance, we can think about his intentions for creating Toothless's prosthetic.
Mm-hmm.
Were his intentions to make a prosthetic that would allow Toothless to be independent, or was his intention to make it to where Toothless could be a vessel of transportation for
Right,
Hiccup?
because from the get-go, it wasn't just a prosthetic where it was like the other half of his tail.
Mm-hmm.
It was a prosthetic that was the other half of his tail, but for that prosthetic to function, he had to be able to put pressure on
Yes.
kind of like a little,
like a little switch.
like a little switch to kind of get the direction of the flap and to open and close.
Yes. And so I think that that's where kind of most of the nuance lies, and I think that Hiccup just wasn't skilled enough to be able to create that technology. And actually, I think it's the third movie where he creates a fin that Toothless is actually able to be independent with. So Toothless doesn't have to rely on Hiccup anymore, and I think that obviously that's the third movie, we don't have to get into it, but I think that that shows Hiccup's integrity and maybe his intentions as a friend to Toothless, and kind of shows that obviously the impairment was a mistake, and I think that he kind of felt that.
Yeah, I just had a thought come to mind really quick of when you said a friend, that I know that we talked about a lot of different things in this class with disability studies, but I think also kind of looking at Hiccup as Toothless's advocate. He was really advocating
Yes.
for Toothless.
That was a huge theme in the first movie because he was having to sneak Toothless around
Right.
their town. And it even got so far as to his dad, like, chaining up Toothless and
Mhm.
using him as a vessel to provide direction to the dragon nest. And I think I don't know, I think we can tie that into what we see in our world, maybe.
Mhm.
So, to wrap up, I guess the real question is, what does Toothless and Hiccup's interdependent relationship say to viewers? Maybe even, what does it say to disabled viewers?
I think that's a really loaded question, but I think it's important to note the writer's choice that at the very end with all the battle and everything, and when Hiccup got injured, that he lost the exact same limb that Toothless lost. So it really did bring back that interdependence and the access to each other's world and the understanding of what each other went through. But it all just kind of ties up advocacy and interdependence and everything all into one at the end of the first movie.
Yeah, and this really ties into, I'm going to try to answer your question, Abby, but I don't know if I'm going to do it successfully, but I think this ties into our world because I see that the common theme of disability on an individual scale is that it's something that needs to be fixed, and this isn't really the case. I think that as we see respective disability advocacy groups kind of surface, they're kind of showing the common theme that you should be able to exist in spaces with various impairments and that they shouldn't be socially disabling for individuals. For example, we see this in deaf space, where deafness isn't something to change, rather something that is able to exist and create meaningful aspects in the individuals that experience it.
I think that's a great way to sum it up, Mia. I really like your perspective on that.
Okay, so I think we posed some really good questions in this discussion, and I'm not sure if they were all answered, but I don't know if the answers do exist, so I think we did a lot good of discussing and breaking down our points. So on that note, I think we will see you guys in the next episode of
Dragons!